The most frequent question I hear from clients, regardless of if it's someone in their 40s planning for their retirement or a couple in their 60s looking to end their careers and move into retirement, is, hey, are we on track? And while in today's video I won't be able to answer that question for you directly, what I can provide for you is some actionable and simple steps to get started finding the number that's so important to everyone looking to retire. So whether your retirement is simply you retiring and not working at all, or if it's you retiring and working in a different department or industry, or if it's you just working less, everyone's retirement is going to look different. Just as everyone's retirement number or what they need to retire is going to look different. So that's a fair disclosure for today that you do need to keep in mind. There's no black and white answer here. And as you can see, or as you'll see when I provide it in a real life example later on, there's a ton of moving parts and a ton of variables to this conversation. So in this video, I promise I will give you a good starting point though, where you can begin this conversation of how much you need to retire. So let's get right into it. The first thing I want to say is there's no dream number or there's no magic number that it takes to hit until you can retire. Now, Yahoo Finance, CNBC, just about every big media corporation, when they post their articles or when they go and run their news segments, has you believing that it takes a specific number to retire. Now, I can take my own parents as a great case example of why that's not true. My dad is very frugal, but in his frugality, he can also enjoy his life, and I'm sure he's going to have a great retirement without even spending that much money. My mom, on the other hand, is less frugal and does enjoy spending money because it brings her joy. Now, both of those are okay, but the main thing here is that you have to understand and be realistic with your planning. So I've reframed this magic number of what it takes to retire, and I've simply broken it down to what are your planned living expenses and what's your planned legacy. Now, let me get into those two. The first you're probably most familiar with, and that's just your living expenses. Okay, once you get into retirement, how are you going to pay your mortgage if you have one? What are you planning on needing per year for medical expenses? If you have to pay health care the first 5 years of retirement before Medicare kicks in, how are you going to pay that? Any living expense that you need to pay in retirement, including travel, including things that you want to do, plan for what that number is going to be. And that second piece there is legacy. Now, most of you, when I'm saying legacy, you probably think of the inheritance that you're going to leave your kids. That's actually not even what I think is inclusive of legacy. Legacy not only means, yes, what you are going to pass on to your children or to your church or to a charity that you care about after you pass away, but it's also going to include what you want to leave or give to your children while you're still alive. Do you want to pay for a down payment for their house? Do you want to help your church build a new complex? There's a lot of things that we see clients want to see with their own eyes, with their own money they've earned over time, and that needs to be considered as well. And all of this really just comes from meeting with clients for several years and listening to what they actually want, because it really comes down to two big questions, okay? Can I do this for the next 30 years financially? And if so, can I leave blank money after I'm gone? And I will say the second one is not as important to a lot of clients. A lot of times clients are going to pass away in their 80s or 90s, God willing, I hope you have a long life. And if you think about your kids, if you have kids, you're hoping that they're financially successful by then. So the odds that they need this large sum of money by the time that you pass away, it might not be as great as you think it is. Again, that speaks to maybe the importance of giving while you're still alive. But the second point there is, hey, they might not have worked their entire career in order to be frugal in retirement so that they can leave money behind for their kids. That's what their kids' working career is for, right? Is to earn money, invest it, and then they can do the same. So that's just something I see every single day with clients. But these two questions are some of the most important that lead to this entire discussion. So now let's get into that example that I mentioned. And this is a fictional example. The names are fictional, the numbers are fictional, but it's very realistic in terms of what I see on a daily and a weekly basis. So I'm going to take Brian and Becky, two fictional clients. For this specific example, we're going to say that Brian and Becky want to spend $100,000 per year. We're going to assume that they have a 2.5% inflation on that $100,000. As you know, everything gets more expensive, from gasoline to groceries to traveling to Europe. So we're going to assume that they need more money every single year to live. Now, yes, we always try to be conservative with our planning. So we're going to assume that both Brian and Becky are going to live for another 3 decades, for 30 years. Now, odds are one of them is not going to live that long, but still, it's worth being conservative. An important consideration here to make is that we often see people spend more money on discretionary and consumer goods and travel in their 60s and 70s when they first retired as compared to their later decades of their 80s and 90s. Now, the reason that it's still realistic to keep this 2.5% inflation percentage increasing every single year is simply because the unspent but planned for money is generally spent towards medical expenses. So I do think it's still realistic to have the 2.5% inflation for all of you counting. So let's take a look at total spending. So Brian and Becky needing $100,000 at 2.5% inflation for 3 decades is ultimately going to amount to $4.39 million in what they need in order to spend that much. And that number sounds really scary. And that's why investment returns are so important, and that's why staying invested is so important. Because let's take a look if Brian and Becky had a portfolio. What size portfolio or what size investments would it take in order to help Brian and Becky meet that number? And what we come up with is if we have a 7% rate of return, you see that the initial portfolio that Brian and Becky need is $1.61 million. So if you compare that to the $4.39 million of spending that they're going to need to do, you can see the importance of staying invested while in retirement. But hold on, because I know there's one more very important measure to add to this here, and a lot of you out there are thinking about it, and that's adding Social Security. So let's say that Brian and Becky combined make up for $50,000 of Social Security, again, indexed for inflation, so it slightly increases over time. Let's say that they have $50,000 of Social Security. Now you'll see that this even drops that initial portfolio need to about $805,000. So it has significantly dropped now from that $4.39 million that we initially would have needed in terms of just spending. So I show you that to show you the importance of, yes, investing, but 2, being realistic with your numbers. And I would be remiss to not point out that a huge part of Brian and Becky's plan is going to be dependent on which accounts they have their assets in, which accounts they choose to withdraw from first, okay? The IRS is very willing and very happy to take a large portion of your retirement income from you. This does speak to the importance of taking from the right account at the right time and being set up in the right accounts, but that is a conversation for a different video. But some other considerations that could change Brian and Becky's plan are if they wanted to leave money to their children, if they wanted to gift money while they are alive, if they wanted to donate to their charity or church, if they wanted to have goals beyond their living expenses, right? So everything I just mentioned earlier, if you wanted to add those things in, of course, that's going to change the plan. I just wanted to give you this simple example here to show you how many variables can play into a plan and why it's so important to be realistic. Because ultimately, projections are only useful if 2 things are true. The first is that you've done your due diligence on the inputs. You know what you're actually going to spend in retirement. You've done your due diligence and you plan on spending that, and then you actually go spend it, right? That's a very important piece. The second part is if you have flexibility on the output. Like I always tell my clients, projections are always going to be wrong. So whether it's a market downturn, whether it's a healthcare event, whether it's needing to help family, something is going to throw your plan off. So if you have flexibility on the output and you have realism on the input, that's going to be a huge part of making sure that your retirement plan is off to a good start. Like I say, most couples don't know what they're spending, even those prepping for retirement, and that's okay, but you're going to need to come up with a ballpark number. Now, an app that I use and I love is Monarch Money. I am not affiliated with them at all. I don't have any benefit from saying that, but Monarch Money is able to directly connect to your credit cards, to your bank accounts, to just about everything and see what you're actually spending. This way you can see your income, you can see your expenses, and whether it's Monarch, whether it's Origin, whether it's, I don't know, there's a ton of apps out there that are great. You need to know what your income and what your expenses are. This is going to really help you in terms of getting set for retirement, finding that living expenses number, and I would say that's where you start here. You start with that living expenses number, you plan what you want to travel for, what you want to plan for medical expenses for, you plan for what it's going to cost to pay your mortgage, groceries, gas, everything that's going to continue as you move into retirement. And then you can move on to what I believe is the harder part, and thinking about what you want to leave behind or what you want to give while you're alive. So I know I'm kind of regurgitating the same info here, but I hit on these points because they are some of the most important. So ultimately, retirement is not a magic number. It's more dependent on your living expenses and your legacy. And when you're planning, you want to be realistic and stay flexible, okay? So if I could leave you with that today, that would be my most important message. So I thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you enjoy this channel, please feel free to subscribe and share. It helps me out greatly. But as always, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.